Hello, everyone, and welcome today to Meet the Employer. But today's going to be a little bit different. We are meeting the expert recruiter. So I'm Rosa B. Thank you all for joining us today. This is going to be up to 40 minutes with the opportunity for you to ask our fabulous guest lots of questions about how you can succeed at interview. But before we get started, I want to introduce you to the fabulous Carol and Tara, who are providing our BSL and our captions today. So thank you very much for joining us. Just wanted to do a quick test and see, is our captions working? All good? Fabulous. Okay, so before we get started, just to let you know that this session is recorded for our Hive, and that's for those who are not able to access the session today, because we want to make sure that this very important session is recorded for everyone and that it's accessible. So this will go on to our Hive, which is our 24/7 website that's stacked full of information, tools, and advice, videos on the world of work and on your job search. But it's also stacked full of other fabulous pieces of information outside of the job search. So if you haven't been on there, please check out the Hive. Okay, so I just wanted to offer for everyone who's out there to share your stories on your interviews. We know that interviewing can be very overwhelming and very daunting, but with Amanda here today, she's going to give us some tips, some wisdom and insight from a recruiter's perspective on how you can succeed at interview. There will be the opportunity at the end to ask some questions. So there'll be a Q&A box as well. But please share your stories because we would love to hear them. We've all got those interview stories, so share them with us. Feel free also, if you want to ask some questions on the chat box. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the amazing Amanda Hesworth. Amanda, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I thought we could start off with you just introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and why you're here today.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me, Rosa. My name's Amanda Hesketh. I have a background of about 20 plus years. I'm not going too far down the line and show my age of recruitment and HR. So I've worked in recruitment consultancy on the high street side. I've worked in-house as a recruiter, and I've also been head of HR of a recruitment company. So for the past 20 plus years, I've been around recruitment. The reason I've got involved in more diversity and inclusion recently is because my son was diagnosed autistic about 7 years ago now. And so I've started, he's in his teens, so I've started looking at opportunities for him for when he leaves school or college or university. And the same as I did with my daughter, and just looking at the different opportunities and bringing in my recruitment experience to see how I can educate employers when they're recruiting people, when they've maybe not looked at all the different diverse people with it that can come into the workplace.
Okay, fantastic. Now, before this session, Amanda, you and I, because we go back for a bit, I used to be an ex-recruiter myself, but you have lots of insight and wisdom to share with us today, right? So I know that a lot of our candidates today are going to be wanting to pick your brains and get more wisdom in terms of how they can really be at their best at interview. But you were sharing some interesting stats with me just the other day, about interviews. Can you share that with our candidates, with our Evenbreak candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I found a great site the other day that I've never been on before. It just shows you how fabulous a Google search is. And it's called jobdescription-library.com. And it's given some interview statistics from April of this year in the UK. So basically, only 2% of candidates who apply for a job are selected to attend an interview. So when you're sending out lots of job applications and you're not getting any information back, it's possibly because of that very low percentage. The average job interview process once you do get an interview sorted, it's about 2 interview stages, dependent on the level of work that you're going for. I think the interviews that I would be involved in and my clients, the average time that the interview lasts is about 45 minutes to an hour, probably longer for a more senior position. But it just shows you that you're going to an interview to tell an employer all about you and what you can bring to their company. And you've only got a very short space of time in which to do that. So preparation and making sure you've got everything in place is key. 4 in 10 employers would reject a candidate if they showed no enthusiasm. So
Wow.
One of the points that I came across when I was doing some research for this and found very true in my own experiences, there are 3 things when people get to interview that you can find quite frustrating as a recruiter. Is 1, if they've not prepared; 2, if they turn up late, but there's no reason or apology. We can all be late, but, there's no reason. And a lack of enthusiasm, almost coming over as rude. However, that may be the case. Sometimes when we're nervous, 93% of people going into an interview have said that they are nervous. I'd like to meet the other 7% and find out what they do to take the nerves away. But the 93% who are nervous, it can come across that way. So this is where I think if you're better prepared, you've got your best clothes on for that scenario and that situation, and you're comfortable, you're giving yourself every chance to put your best self forward.
Yeah. I mean, we want to be authentic at interview.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to fake it. And so it kind of goes back to, why are you applying for the job in the first place? So it's really important to align your values or know what you're looking for when you're searching for that job well and truly before the interview starts. And you brought us some stats there about prep. And so that's going to lead me on to my first question.
Okay.
So we know that interviewing can feel like a very unnatural process, right? We've got to pack it all in an hour or 45 minutes. Sometimes we feel like we might be tested and it just feels really unnatural. But we know that prep is king or queen. Can you share with us, please, from your perspective as a recruiter, what are the must-dos? This is well and truly before you get to the day of interviews. So we're talking about weeks in advance of. What are those key things that you would recommend to our Evenbreak candidates that they really ought to do as prep?
Okay. So preparing for an interview is something that you really need to spend some time doing, because if you don't, the chances are you're not going to show your best self at the interview. But also, I always remember that my grandma always used to say to me, fail to plan to fail, sort of thing. So that stuck with me for many years. So if you've taken the time to apply for a job and you've been one of the 98%, one of the 2% who've got the interview and not fallen by the wayside with the other 98%, then, make sure you prepare, because otherwise, who knows when the next interview might come along, let's get some prep done. So let's look at the company. You've applied to the company already. So there's obviously something in that business or that job description, that advert that you've seen that's made you want to apply for that role. The company research these days, I think, is more easy to do than ever before. Again, showing my age, when I went for jobs, when I left college, you had to write off for brochures and you had to, actually go and visit a place. You couldn't look at a case study on a website or download a PDF. So all these things where you can, that are accessible and free, where you can go and download information. If you're going to a company that sells a product or a service, I would always advise for a person to behave as a customer. So ring up and make a ghost inquiry. So just ring up and pretend that you want to buy something, you want to have a service off them, and just see what the customer experience is like, because whichever department you're going into, if you don't have the customers, then obviously there's no business. So I'd always advise that. I'd also say, if you know anybody in the business who already works there, have a chat with them and ask them how they find it, what it's like to work there. do the values and the description on the website match what that person's saying about that business? In the stats that I was looking at, I was really surprised is probably the wrong word, but Glassdoor have done a top 20 companies to work for in the UK. And number one is Rentokil.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Now, Rentokil, if you think of the job, they do a lot of pest type work, sanitary type work. You know, it's not the most glamorous work in the world, but we all need it at some point in our lives. So, you know, doing the research on the company, look at Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a rating system that current employees and past employees can actually rate the employer, a bit like TripAdvisor, Trustpilot, those sorts of ratings out of 5. I would also say as well, look at what training and development's available, because if that is really important to you, you need to be aware of what the longer term, you need to have a line of sight. Is this job for today or is it for a career? Do they have that capacity? If you're joining a small to medium-sized business, there might not be as much opportunity because there isn't that volume of people. However, in a small business, you may get to do more than you would in a larger business because there are fewer people. So I think you need to weigh up the pros and cons of how you match the job with the information you find out from the website, people who work there, Glassdoor. If you're going for a financial role, maybe check out Companies House if they're a limited company or a company that has to report their accounts through Companies House. Some bits and pieces are free, some you have to pay for, but not very much. It's about £1, I think, to get some figures from historical ones. So at least you can see what sort of shape they are in financially. I think another thing to think about as well is if you have been told who's interviewing you, which I would expect most people know who the interviewer's name is, I would check them out on LinkedIn. So you can actually see what the company, how long they've been at the company, how they've progressed in the company, where they've worked before. So it might help with some general conversation when you first meet to open up the interview. I think as well, social media is a great place to do a company search because you can see how people are interacting with the company. You can see if there are any complaints, how they deal with their customers. You can see if they've got any new product launches, but also you can see how many followers they've got. And so, you know, social media isn't the be all and end all for everybody, but it gives you a good idea of if they are social media savvy, how they display themselves on the different portals of LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm not a TikToker yet, but I keep teetering on the edge. So I'll stick with Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, I think, and Facebook. But all those things are places where you can gain information. But one thing I always do the night before I go for an interview, or I have somebody going for an interview, I would always say to them, do a quick Google search, just put the company name in Google, see what comes up. If anything's happened in the last week that is newsworthy, or if something's happened that's amazing or something the other way that's not so amazing, then at least you can get that information quite quickly. And again, you know, a lot of people, when they were polled on the statistics, 33% said they found it hard to find company information. I'm sorry, but in this day and age, you know, I feel that that's probably that's difficult for me to swallow because I just don't believe it's difficult for people to find information out about companies. It's more readily available now than it ever has been.
So with tech, the fact that we have tech now and technology moves us on, there's ample opportunity to really do your research and find out. Yeah. And equally on the flip side, you know, employers and organizations use social media to find candidates, such as LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, etc. So it's equally important for us to be mindful of our own personal brand online as well, because employers are checking that out. I also wanted to just stay on this question. But, you know, how important is it to be analysing that job spec and understanding what it is that the employer is asking for? Do you have any specific techniques that you would recommend to help support a candidate be able to when they're at interview, be able to demonstrate how they meet those skills and that essential criteria that the employer is looking for?
Yeah, I think as a recruiter, when I speak to people, it's mostly video or telephone. Gone are the days, obviously, when people used to come into the office face to face. I make sure that I've got a good understanding of the company I'm sending them their details to, with their permission, of course. So I've got the job description, I know the company, I sometimes know the hiring manager who they're going to go and work for. So I can add that extra value with this person who you're going to see can do this, this, and this. This is what they like to do socially, and just give them a picture. But going back to the job description, I adapt what we call Pareto's law 80-20. 80% you can do the job, 20% you can develop into it. And if I've got a candidate who is looking very good on paper, I'll then give them a telephone interview and start to look down the points of the job description, and then send the job description for them to do the same thing and have a look if they feel they match that job description. The qualifications are an easy one, aren't they? Have you got this, GCSE? Have you got this level 3? Have you got this degree? You can just tick it off. Are you a good problem solver? Well, that's for me as the interviewer before I send their details over to the client, to find out how they solve problems or what their communication skills are like. And I would do that in conjunction with the emphasis in the job description as to how good a communicator they need to be. Just add in there, a lot of job descriptions have, you must be a good communicator, but it's got to be relevant to the job. So if you're not the most extrovert communicator in the world and you read in this job description feel that that's what it's asking for, maybe have an opportunity to speak to somebody at the business and ask how important that is. Because we do put a lot of soft skills on job descriptions and we just band them about. And sometimes it's not thought whether that skill is actually really required. So from a communication point of view, if somebody was going into a sales role, for example, then communication, if they're external sales, would be key. So I would talk to them about how they go about selling, what prep do they do, when have they been in a situation before where they've had a customer where it's been a regular customer, but it's turned into a complaint? How have they dealt with that? And give them some scenarios and see how they answer in line with the job description. And then how they answer, I can get an idea of how structured their thought is for when they go in front of the client, because there are some tips out there about structuring your answers.
And that just kind of leads me on to, I know that you're a big fan of STAR. There's also another technique called PAR. Can you talk to us about what STAR is?
Yeah.
And how you can use that to demonstrate how you meet the skills at interview?
Yeah, okay. So STAR is a mnemonic that stands for situation, task, action, and result. And basically, the STAR method helps a candidate. If you think 93% are nervous, it helps you walk through your story and your evidence against that job description of how you can answer that question and give the recruiter what they're looking for, or the hiring manager, so that they can mark whether you can do that job. Now, there is some hints and tips here. STAR is all over the internet. You can Google it. We've got a link I think we're going to put in here as well. Wow, it's just popped up. Thank you, Toby. So we've got STAR. So STAR stands for situation. So this is where you're asked a question by the recruiter and you tell them a story. So you talk about setting the scene for what was happening in the example of this story you're going to tell. What happened? How did it come about? Who was involved? What was the main issue? So you're setting out your stall. You then talk about the task. So you're describing your responsibility in the situation. A lot of people go to interview and they use we all the time instead of I. So we did this, we did that. And I have to say, what was your part in that? So with STAR, you can get used to describing your responsibility in the situation. What responsibility did you take to solve that problem? Did your manager assign the task, or did you put your hand up and ask to do it? Action is all about explaining the steps you took to address the problem. So what did you do? So bite-sized chunks of how you actually did it. And then the result is all about what went well, what didn't go so well, what could have gone better. I'm a big believer in, when I've finished a project or a part of my work, to sit back and do a little bit of a reflection on it, maybe the day after or the week after, and think, right, what can we do better for next time? Celebrate what we did well, look at what didn't go so well, and reformulate that, and then move on and be better for the next time. And that's how STAR can help candidates keep their stories, because these are things you can practice at home. You know, if you think of the soft skills that you may be asked, you're going to be asked about communication, maybe problem solving, listening skills, time management, all these key things. So if you could prepare a STAR answer, and it could be work-based, it could be educational-based, it could be voluntary work-based, you know, if you can prepare a couple of examples in a STAR format of an example of communication, then that would hold you in really good stead. And that may help reduce the nerves that you're feeling, and help control your breathing as well when you're answering the questions. Because if it's something you've practiced, and I'm a big advocate for practicing in the mirror, I know it's probably a bit off-putting, but I now know, looking at this screen, I do funny things with my mouth. And there's nothing I can do about that. And I do try and control it. But if you practice in the mirror, there may be something that you also do that you think, well, I think I wish I could do that a little bit less.
A lot of candidates can get hung up on, when they're at interview, feeling the need to over-explain the situation part of STAR. I read somewhere that really candidates should spend 80 to 90% of their time talking about the action they took and the result. What's your thoughts on that?
I think describing the situation, if you practiced it and it's quite clear, it doesn't need to be a massive, dialogue, massive big chapter of why, why you should go into loads of detail. The action and the result, explaining, what was the outcome and the output with everything that you put in, I think is, the two most important. But you need to have them in the STAR mnemonic in that order to make sense, to tell your story and give yourself a good, give the hiring manager a good overview of what you can do.
I'm just going to go to our Q&A because it's been an interesting question that's come in. But first of all, I want to say thanks to Mohammed. I was given feedback, not enough positive engagement. That sort of talked to what we were speaking to earlier about not faking it, but being authentic and really wanting that opportunity. But that's because you've got to do your research, find out about the company, do their values align to yours? What is it about the job role and the organization that really appeals to you? Okay, so thank you for that, Mohammed. We've had also somebody else ask, how do you know what type of interview to prepare for? I have had, when asking, tell me it's a blended interview, but each interview team think it's something different. One interview did a pre-interview question and gave a few days notice and a cut-off time 2 days before the interview. Another didn't give any clue what they wanted and gave it just before the interview itself. This was the same company, but different departments. That's interesting. One interview did a mixture of speed, STAR, and competency. One interview in the middle did a role play and didn't want any STAR answers. So this is a really, really good question. Thank you for sending that in, because that speaks to one of the questions I was going to ask you, Amanda. There's so many different types of interviews now, right? Traditional interview, the panel interview, the video interview, the strengths interview, the behavioral interview, and then there can be this thing called the hybrid. What are you noticing are the more common types of interview structures and formats that are out there? But also, can we ask before the interview what type of format or structure it is? Because if we don't ask, we don't get, right?
I would definitely ask. I mean, when I send an invite to one of my candidates to interview with me, I would say, I'd either ring them up or I'd do an email if I couldn't get them on the phone. And I'd just say, look, you've applied for a role. I'd like to have 15, 20 minutes with you on the phone, and then I'll give you some information in some more detail about the role. And I would like you to go away and have a look and see if you think that company, because recruitment agencies will not advertise who they're working for every time. So it gives the individual time to go away, have a look at the company, have a look at the website, do a few bits and pieces like we've just mentioned, and then they can come back to me and we can talk more them and job description and how they match and their values and all those sorts of bits and pieces. With the different types of interviews, I would most definitely ask, if you've got an interview date through, go and ask the person who sent the email. A lot of places I look at now, because I've always got my job radar up, with whatever's going on. And I know if you apply for a job with the civil service through the civil service portal, they provide a really quite a lengthy pack of job description, how they're going to assess you. I can't remember the name of the format they use for their competencies, but it's really detailed for every job. And they actually have an email address that if you're allocated an interview and you want to ask any questions or talk to them about any accommodations or anything like that, you can email them. But obviously every company's not the same. So I would just say, if you don't ask, you're not going to get, so ask.
Mm-hmm. They do a hybrid, don't they? And yeah, I have seen that their pack is really, really thorough. They're very transparent in communicating the interview format, the structure, and they actually give information on it. And they will show the behaviours that they're looking for based on the different level of role. It does involve a lot of reading, but they do give you the information up front. So some companies are better than others at being very transparent about it. And often if you go on to places like Glassdoor, you might have actually others give some insights into the type of interviews that happens at companies. So thank you to Anonymous for sending that. That was a really, really, really a piece of interesting story sharing with us. So yes, you can ask for the format and the structure. There's no harm in doing that. So I want to sort of move on. And I want to sort of flip it around a little, because there's also an onus and responsibility on employers to offer accommodations. We know that traditional interviews can be, as I say, there's a feeling that it can feel quite unnatural. Some progressive and inclusive employers are now doing things such as structured conversations or offering accommodations throughout the interview process. Can we talk to that a little bit? How might a candidate ask for accommodations at interview? And do you even think that they should disclose or discuss or share their disability? Is it worth doing that at interview stage?
Yeah, big question. One of the stats that I was reading last week before we spoke on Monday, 77% of students leaving uni, and I think this was a prospects survey last year, 77% of students leaving uni with a disability felt that they didn't want to disclose at any stage because they were worried about discrimination. So we all know there's discrimination laws out there. We all know that, within recruitment, we have an idea of what they should do as an employer. But what we need to do is feel psychologically safe that we can actually ask for that accommodation. So I've attended a few webinars recently with people from some of the big advocates for accommodations, and a lot of the accommodations people are asking for, they're not actually that big and they would suit everybody. So I think if you feel safe, because the interview process and the website and the job description has got information on there that is encouraging people from all walks of life, I think on Auto Trader, the car online selling website, they have gone over and above. I mean, their diversity and inclusion is really fabulous. And they've gone over and above, because on their website, there's quite a big paragraph that says, if you need this, let us know. If you need that, but you're the best person to tell us what will help you show your best self at interview. So for example, I've been working with some students looking for work experience, and one of them said to me, if I go for my interview, I need to be in a dead quiet room, otherwise I'm really distracted. And I said, God, I'd be the same. And when the guy who he was going for the interview with said, I'll meet him halfway and we'll meet in a coffee shop, I just said, that's not going to work for him. And I explained and educated and said, too many distractions, too many noises, you won't get the best person. Can we get a room for you at college, or can we do this or that? And he said, yeah, fine, that's no problem. So I think if you ask, that's great. But let's be realistic. Not everybody, not every employer is as educated. So it is one of those scenarios where you need to feel and know the company, and then you can ask. If you don't ask and you want to disclose later on down the line, you're the best person to gauge when that time is. I can't answer for everybody whether you should or you shouldn't and when you should do it. But I do know that employers out there are doing a lot more on diversity and inclusion. There's a lot more numbers being recorded with different groups of people being employed. I just think we're on the right path, but we're not there yet where it's completely inclusive.
There's also a fabulous site called Jobs Accommodations Network. It is an American site for anyone who wants to get a sense of what accommodations can I ask based on my disability or my condition.
Yeah.
Toby, and I think you're going to put that up on the chat box for people to be able to see as well. Okay, I'm going to read out, this is Ruth. Ruth, thank you very much for sending this through. Sorry, just before that, actually, I'm noticing there's a whole lot of questions now coming in the chat box and the Q&A box, so please bear with me. I'm trying to move between the two. So, okay, just on the STAR one, is it the STAR format the main interview technique in the majority of interview styles that interviewers use? This is a technique actually that the candidate can use. It's not a format that the employer uses. It's how you can respond to those interview questions, right, Amanda? But this is interesting because can you use the STAR format for different types of interview styles, strengths, behavior, or hybrid?
I think so, because when I first started in recruitment, this is how we were trained to get people ready for interview, and it stayed with me. And I am quite a curious person, so I do like to delve into new ways of doing things, and I do like to be at the front of trends and stuff like that. But STAR has stayed with me because I've got a tendency just to get so excited with nerves and waffle, which I hope I'm not doing today, but I'm a very enthusiastic person. And if I didn't have STAR to ground me and get me in the space of talking about a situation, a task, what action I actually did and what was the result, how important and how much value did I add, I think I'd be just talking like Jack and Ori telling a story, but with no structure.
Yeah.
So a lot of places, a lot of recruiters are, they do prefer that because they can actually have a more pleasant experience and work out if you're right for the job because of that structure as well.
Great. And really what STAR is it's a little mini success story that's highlighting, an accomplishment or a result of using a specific skill. And as you said, have more than one example. And it's like a little deck file that you can pull out dependent on the type of interview that you're going for, but always try and have more than one example. So I hope that helps. Okay, so I'll just move on. What do you do if you've had 2 strokes like I have? I have to think about my words, forget them some of the time. I have fielded 8 relatively easy interviews so far, whereas before my strokes, I found work a lot easier to get. I do the interview practice for days in advance, writing down my answers to common questions, but I still forget these things and how to say it at interview. My latest thought is to take a notebook into the interview with my skills and abilities and examples on it, just in case of things I forget. Any more suggestions? Can I just sort of bring this back to the asking the accommodations and sharing that? I'm just wondering, Ruth, are you sharing, your condition at interview stage, and are you asking for specific accommodations or adjustments at that point? How comfortable would you feel in doing that? But I'm going to come back to you, Amanda. What are your thoughts on that, and any other tips?
I'm of the age now, I forget words quite frequently. So I would take a notebook if I was in an interview situation. And I would also ask the interviewer if it was okay if I took some notes so I didn't forget. If they were saying something really important that I would want for a second interview, being optimistic, I would definitely have a notebook. I would, like Rosa said, maybe look at if you've asked for accommodations before or if you've not. It's maybe something, because it's quite specific and you've had quite a lot of success in the past. It might be something, Ruth, if you want to have a chat afterwards, I'm more than happy to go into a bit more detail and think. But I think the notebook suggestion is absolutely fabulous. And everybody, I think, should take a notebook in with your questions in. If you need to refer to your questions because you've forgotten them, then that's fine. If you don't, the book can sit on the desk. It's not causing anybody any harm.
Absolutely. Ruth, if you want to hang back later, what we will do is, if we've got enough time, Amanda, and if you're okay with it, we're going to sort of keep this open so that if anybody has specific questions, and maybe if you want to on mic and you want to ask Amanda some specific questions, please feel free to do so. Okay, so I'm just going to go on. There's quite a lot coming through the chat now, and I want to make sure that we get to it. Okay, there is a couple of in the Q&A, but I'll come to those later, guys, if that's okay. Okay, so we know that the accommodations thing can be a very big area. If we don't ask, we don't get, and it can make all the difference in our interview, can't it? Yeah. Okay. Guys, please share. Have you ever asked for accommodations or adjustments? And how has that supported you at interview? I'd really love to hear your stories, so please do share that. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about dress code. I've heard the rule in terms of interview attire is to dress at least one level higher than the position you're going for. How true is that? Can you give us some insight?
Yeah, I actually read something on LinkedIn yesterday that made me laugh, because somebody actually posted that very thing. Why does everybody think that they have to be formal? Because years ago, it was dead easy. You could be formal because that's what you did. You went for an interview, you went face to face, and you had your suit on or your dress and your jacket or whatever, and you went to your interview. You had a tie if you're a man, and it was all very, proper, or it was seen that way at the time. Yesterday, somebody posted exactly the same thing on LinkedIn, and he said, what does everybody think about dress code? And did a poll. It's not quite finished yet, so I can't give you any results today, but he said he'd gone for an interview for quite a senior tech job, and he was interviewed by the recruitment or talent manager, head of recruitment, in a Metallica t-shirt and jeans. Now, I think it's right. Anything goes these days. But my advice would be, you wouldn't turn up to Barclays Bank in a Metallica t-shirt and jeans. You have to match the place that you're going to. So I would say that if you've done your research and you've got some idea on the website, how the people dress, how the people look, if they're real people at that company, it will give you an idea. Sometimes on an interview invite, it might say what the dress code is for the interview. I would always go more formal than informal if you're not sure, because you can obviously have that conversation at the interview. But I'd say there's three dress codes. There's formal, which is your more corporate, your suit, shirt and tie. There's your smart casual, which I think we're all different on smart casual, but it means a jacket and a shirt, but maybe not the tie, and maybe coloured and chinos. And then you've got your casual, which is your metallic t-shirt, your jeans. And I think if you're working in tech, not to lump everybody together, but, we've all watched films that have been derived around Google and that type of environment. They do walk around in jeans and t-shirts and trainers, and it's that campus feel. It's relevant for that business. I once went for an interview at Center Parcs, and I'd never been there before as a customer. Clearly didn't do enough research and turned up in a long black shift dress, long black jacket, quite tall shoes, and looked very formal. I looked like I was going for a job, maybe as a funeral director or something. I don't know what I was trying to be that day, but it certainly wasn't to work at Center Parcs. The car park is really far away from the office where I was being interviewed, because I was being interviewed in the main butterfly centre at Penrith. And my feet were absolutely killing me by the time I'd walked from the car park on sort of hard, rough ground to the butterfly centre, and I just got it so wrong. But it's helped me with candidates, because that was quite a long time ago. I've probably told that story quite a few times, and it just resonates with me, because I felt a bit of a nana, really, because I was stood there in the middle of chinos, jeans, fleeces, waterproof jackets, and there's me looking like I'd come to, I don't know, serve a notice on somebody or something. So yeah, just do your research and get your clothes ready the night before as well. Then if you have any overlies or anything like that, your stuff's ready. I always have it on a hanger if I've got a big important meeting. Have everything out on the hanger the night before.
Okay, we're going to move on now too. So that's all the sort of prep, guys, that you might want to think about well in advance of the interview. So that interview day is arriving, right? Day before. What's your top tips day before interview?
Right. So 57% of candidates take public transport to an interview, 39% drive, and 4% walk or cycle. I suppose that depends where you are in the country. It'll be a lot higher on public transport, for example, if you're in London. But they're the stats. And I have got a village where I live is plagued with traffic lights. And so make sure the night before you do a quick run to the place, if you can, if it's close enough, or a couple of days before. Check if there's any roadworks, check if there's any roads closed. If you're on public transport, make sure there's no alterations to timetables. I know Network Rail and bits and pieces with the COVID train travel, that's been changed around quite a lot. So just make sure you've got everything in place to get there. Make sure your bike's pumped up if you're going on your cycle, all those sorts of things. I know I sound like I'm teaching my granny to suck eggs, but they're so basic, and they do come up so many times that people have missed the bus and they didn't realise there wasn't another one for an hour and a half. If you're going by bus and it's that sort of infrequent service, get the one before, get there early and lurk around, not in reception, but around, just go and find a coffee, have a coffee somewhere. I would always say never turn up to an interview more than sort of 15 minutes early, because you may put unnecessary pressure on the hiring person to come out and see you. So that would be, that would be another thing. Make sure you've had a run through your CV. So if they ask you about your dates, you're quite clear. But again, take a copy of your CV with you in your notebook. And then if you need to refer to anything, clothes ready, make sure you've read through the job description, you've had another search on Google just to see if there's any bits and pieces. If you've tried to contact anybody who's worked there, they may say, keep in touch, let me know how you get on. It's always worth giving them another ring the night before, just seeing if anything, significant's happened. Again, it depends on the size of the business, and what job you're going for would depend on, what you're looking for.
Okay. Guys, again, please share your experiences on your interviews, successful interviews that you've had. What's worked for you in the past? Feel free to share those nightmare interviews where it just didn't work. What happened? We really love the sharing of stories. Amanda just shared a fabulous story about the outfit that she wore to the interview and how misappropriate it was. But, what kind of stories do you have about interviews that you've attended in the past? We'd really love you to share them in the chat box. Just go for it, okay? Right, now, day of interview. Doom, doom, doom. It's finally arrived. Okay. What are some of the strategies you are going to recommend to our Evenbreak candidates to reduce overwhelm in the interview?
Okay.
Answer the questions.
I think breathing is a massive thing when you're in an interview and the nerves are going and inside you feel all sort of butterfly. I mean, this might not be appropriate for everybody, but I'm just remembering how I feel and what candidates tell me how they felt. I always think breathe in, and while you sat waiting for your interview to come, just get your breathing right. Just, sit, and I sort of breathe in for 5, hold for 4 and out for 3. If there's a receptionist there, it may be a bit odd, but it's something that you could maybe do sort of quietly to yourself. Another thing, when you get to the interview, if there is a reception person on duty or an office manager who greets you, you never underestimate the I can't think of the word now. Never underestimate how much influence they have with the hiring manager. Whenever I was head of internal recruitment at Ainscow Crane Hire, we had a reception downstairs. It was quite formal. And I would always go, when I'd said goodbye to the candidate, I would always go to reception and say, "Did you find them?" And it's amazing how much information you can get from the receptionist as to how the person came across, what they talked about. And it's not an important decision maker for the overall decision, whether they get the job or not, but it just makes up a little bit more of the picture of the person. So I would say, breathing, get to, have a bit of a chat with the receptionist. When you get in there, if you're struggling with a question, if you say, please, could you repeat the question, then get the interviewer to repeat the question. Don't be afraid to ask that, because, sometimes the interviewer may have asked the question in a way that you just simply don't understand.
Okay.
So they might rephrase it or say it again.
One I like is to ask for that glass of water. So when they ask that question, is to reach for the glass of water. It gives you that 5 or 6 seconds
Pause.
to think, to pause, and think about how you want to answer it. I've often had in interviews those double-barreled questions. And due to my dyslexia or ADHD, I may be a little nervous, and I'm trying to remember the whole question that they've asked. And my brain is just already fried because I want to answer that double-barreled question, but find it really difficult because I might not remember all of it. And then I'm so caught up maybe in answering the first part of the question that I miss the second part. So it goes back to what you said earlier about writing down, taking a note, because it can jog your memory, or having a pause. And Amanda, is there anything wrong in asking them to repeat the question?
I don't think so, because, if somebody says to me, can you just repeat the question again? I've got no problem whatsoever, because, I've been in situations with candidates and with myself where, like you say, double barrel questions. I'm at the age now where my brain sometimes can get a bit like, one at once. Or I may say, can I just answer the first question? Now, can you repeat the second? And maybe do that. But I think you get a feel from your interviewer. And, there's a lot more training happening with interviewers, because in the past, there's been a lot of hiring managers who have never been trained to interview. So they think that they should talk, for 80% of the time and tell you all about the company, and then give you a bit of time at the end to ask questions. There's a lot of training happen. So hopefully if somebody's struggling with a question, the interviewer, let's hope they'll be, skilled enough to actually rephrase it.
Agreed. I'm going to let you we're just going to pause there so that you can get your little glass of water or your cup of tea.
I had no voice
at
all yesterday. So
that's no problem. You take your time, Amanda. Okay, so we're still on that day of interview, right? What are the common do's and don'ts? What are you hearing from employers? What can you share? What nuggets can you share with our candidates? What's the common things? See, there I go. I'm asking you about 6 different questions.
One at once.
Let me just ask you,
Rosa.
What are the common do's and don'ts?
Okay, so common don't. We'll start with the don'ts. Let's start with the negative and finish on the positive. So the don'ts. If you're going to be late, make sure you've got the number of the person who's interviewing you, or the company who's sent, or the HR department, whatever number's been given to you. Make sure you get a message to them, and you've got credit on your phone, or you've got battery on your phone, that you can actually say, I'm really sorry, I'm running late. There's been a breakdown on the bus. They're sending another one. A lot of interviewers have been distracted from the actual interview when people turn up if they've not apologised or given a reason why they're late. So before you've even opened yourself up in an interview and to tell them about yourselves, if you arrive late, which sometimes it can't be helped, if you don't give a reason and apologise, then, it can really damage your chances. And if 2% of people are getting interviews, you've wasted that chance. You need to really be careful. So, if you're going to be late, make sure you ring in advance and let them know. Make sure you've got that enthusiasm. If you want to be there, I'm not talking about everybody jumping around like, Tigger out of Winnie the Pooh. But if you're going for a job that you've applied for, show the interest. Excuse me. I know somebody said before about they were given some feedback about they weren't enthusiastic enough. I think it was Mohammed. If you want to hang by
engagement. Yeah, Mohammed said the feedback he received was lack of positive engagement.
Yeah, so I'm not I'm not quite sure, but obviously we weren't in the room with him. So if you want to hang back and describe that a little bit more, it could be that feedback is good, but it's not detailed enough for you to make changes. So enthusiasm, make sure you've got your phone switched off. Again, I'm granny and sucking eggs, but when you're going for an interview and you're nervous, your thought process just goes all over the place.
Amanda, what are employers telling you, or the do's and don'ts? What's the common patterns you're finding that when employers give you feedback? What's the most common thing?
Lack of preparation. So employers are saying, came and you didn't know what you come for. Not any of my candidates, that's their own, I'd like to say, because I hope I prepare my candidates very well. But, they turn up and they don't know much about the job description. They've not done much about the company. One of my opening questions is, just to ease people in, what do you know about the business and how have you prepared for today? As an opener. Oh, excuse me, I'm leaking now. My nose is going in my eyes. So yeah, I would say that's the main frustration with employers, is the preparation.
I wanted to ask, the candidate is interviewing the employer as much as the employer is interviewing the candidate.
Most definitely.
Right? They have power and control in that interview too. How important is it that when in the closing of the interview that the candidate asks questions? What sort of questions should they ask?
I think at the end of the interview, it would be things like, have you got a timeline to make a decision? Then you might find out a little bit more if there's more of an interview process, if you don't already know. I would ask them to follow up on something you've got on your CV that matches their job description. How do they see that working? I would maybe ask, now you've met me and you've seen my CV, what training and development would you suggest I would need to start off really good, well in your business? You could prepare a list. I remember once I had an interview with a lady and I said to her at the end, have you got any questions? And she asked me 12. And I just said to her at the end of the interview, I said, I don't mind answering questions. I said, but 3 of them we'd covered in the interview and a couple of them were on the advert. So just make sure your questions are relevant and maybe keep it to 2 or 3, maybe 4. If the interviewer has given you like an hour slot, for example, and you're at 10 to the hour, 10 minutes for questions is quite a good amount of time. So make sure you use it. When people say, oh, I think you've answered everything, I'm fine, I sometimes feel that that's maybe not as well prepped, or they're not that interested and they're making that decision to deselect themselves. So, and I would also ask about values. We've not mentioned values. I've got a free link that we'll put in, if it's not already been put into the chat, for how you can assess your values, because we talk about values and I wasn't quite sure. I thought I knew what mine were, but when I'd done this questionnaire, which is free and takes about 5 to 10 minutes, and you get the results emailed to you, it was a really good exercise to carry out in, not taking up much time and much brain power. It was quite easy to work through. But that helped me in matching what I do with myself. So,
and then you can use that to match it to the values that the employer
of the company,
or their website or their vision or their mission statement. And asking of questions can demonstrate that positive engagement, because it can show that it can demonstrate that you've done your research, the company, you're curious, you're interested, you're engaged. So asking relevant and suitable questions is really, really, really important. So guys, please don't shy away from doing that. One last question, then we're going to go to Q&A. How might a candidate discuss their disability positively if they so choose?
I would say there's quite a few guidelines dependent on disability. Your disability the best. So I would say, if you're speaking to somebody over the phone or video or face-to-face, just have that honest conversation with them. If you feel psychologically safe, and I've mentioned that word quite a few times, but it's almost psychological safety, is that you feel that you're not going to be at any detriment if you mention your disability. I think, if you feel you need to get it out there, then you need to, You can speak to a room full of different people and everybody's got a different view on this, but you've got to do what's right for you because you know what accommodations you need. And sometimes they might not be massive accommodations. Before I, say 20 years ago when I went into recruitment and we were talking about accommodations and disability in the workplace, my views have just changed so massively in that 20 years. But it's because of education. It's because I've met people. It's because I've interviewed people. It's because of my son now. And you grow into the information. So just, have things written down and say, I need this. I would prefer it if we did that. There was a lady from JP Morgan, and she was saying her accommodations are, she has a chair with a high back because of a neck issue that she has. She has headphones because she can't work properly with distractions. They had a floating office policy where it was grab a desk, whoever was first in the morning. And she asked if she could have a permanent desk because she wanted to have her things in one place. She didn't want to come in each morning with the anxiety of not knowing where she might be sitting. And all these things could be for anybody. Why can anybody not ask for that sort of accommodation? But it's all education. So you've got to go with what you feel. I can't answer.
Yeah, there's also the other flip side of it too, is discussing your disability positively when it's coming to answer a question that's on a particular skill or strength. We did a webinar called Discussing Disability Positively, and how you can, if you so want to, discuss your disability openly, because with our lived experience of disability, we have really unique strengths: resilience, grit, determination. Yeah. And if it's relevant to the job description, you can, I suppose, talk to a specific skill referencing your disability, but as long as it's relevant to the position description, and as you mentioned, you feel psychologically safe in doing so. It also gets that big white elephant out in the room, and it demonstrates to the employer that you're strong and confident in who you are, all of you. But you're demonstrating some of your unique strengths and talents, not in spite of it, because of your disability or your condition. Okay, we're going to go to the Q&A. So I have a PhD, an MSc, and a BSc. I do not want to work in my profession. I applied for a refugee assistant at the council. How would I answer them to show that I am? How would I best answer them to show that I am not an academic? Good question, Amanda.
Yeah, well done on all those qualifications. PhD, wow. I used to sit next to somebody who was doing a PhD and the amount of work she had to go through. With regards to showing for the job you're looking to do, you don't want to, I wouldn't want to hide my academic side, but it's about discussing the reason why you've applied for the job that you've applied for. So maybe have some examples ready with STAR that shows that you could do the job that you've mentioned, and pick out bits from the job description that you've covered. If you've got less work experience that you've covered at university whilst doing your PhD, don't be proud. Don't hide it. Be proud of it.
Absolutely. But it's also sharing with them why you've applied for this job, because for some people it may be a career change. It may be that it's a work-life balance. So putting that on the table and just being honest and transparent and authentic about that is absolutely fine, right? Yeah. Okay, so I asked for the first time for adjustments in an interview. I am now back on the job market after over 30 years of continuous employment. I was asked what did I need, as all they could think of was for those with a physical disability. Yeah. I had no idea what I could ask for or need. I managed to get help, this is a long one, from a disability resource to reduce the number of people, more time for a written task, and for the interviewers to remind me to get back on task. The interview HR wouldn't meet all the adjustments from their own access department, fully saying that I had more help than other candidates. Okay, how would you, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. When people think of adjustments, they think of altering the width of doorways and putting in, ground floor toilets and things like that. And we're far removed from that. We need to think about hidden disabilities, all the disabilities, not just one area. I would say where you've put, I had no idea what I asked for or needed, maybe reflect on the interview and have a look at, we'll put the link in the chat for the reference that Rosa made before about the company, albeit in America. It may give you some ideas of how to phrase things and have them written in your book, so that if you do go blind, word blind with nerves, you've got a reference to go back to. The HR wouldn't meet all the adjustments from their own access. I mean, I would go back to HR and say, look, I've not been successful with the job, but just to help me with future positions, what was it that you felt I was getting ahead of other candidates? Mm-hmm. Because other candidates haven't got your disability. So we've got to make it a fair playing field. So I think I would just go back to them and see if you can ask for some more feedback, not in a confrontational way, just in a helpful way, that you can actually have some information to make, to help you with your next interview and not put you off interviews. Because after 30 years of continuous employment, I'm sure looking for a job is scary enough without people, putting curveballs in the way.
Absolutely. Okay, that sort of takes us to the end of the session. Just a couple of things. I just wanted to say a very big thank you again to Tara and also Carol today, and Toby as ever for supporting us in the background. And Amanda, what can I say? Absolutely fabulous insights and wisdom. And of course to everyone for joining us today. Amanda, are you okay to hang back for 5?
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to hang back as well and ask Amanda specific questions, we will open the mic. But to everyone else, thank you very much for coming along. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've got lots of other webinars, lots of Meet the Employer webinars and webinars that will support you with regards to your whole job search journey. So get on the Hive, check it out and register, and see you all soon. So for those who want to hang back, please do so. And you're more than welcome to either use the chat or the Q&A box to ask Amanda any further questions, or if you'd like to on mic, please do so. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.